Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate podcast, Betoota Talks, our weekly interview show, second of the year. We started the year strong with Keith Urban, and we are following that up with another iconic Queenslander. Thank you for joining us, Senator Larissa Waters of the Greens. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, and Wendell Hussey. How's things in Canberra, Senator?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't think I've ever been mentioned in the same sentence as Keith Urban before, so my head's going to swell a bit. But yeah, no, I'm in Canberra here. We've got Parliament sittings and we just left a pretty unexciting question time, I have to say. So I'm very pleased to be speaking with you lot.
Well, thanks for joining us. I suppose, I'm not sure if we met in our travels to Canberra back before they started being really precious as to who was allowed to get signed into Parliament House. We went down there a few times, and we've met a few of you. And what we've noticed, Senator Waters, is the U is starting to grow. The few of yous are now a fair few of yous.
They fed us after midnight.
Yep. And you know, Queensland, right? There's been a Queenslander, Greenslander, what did I say? Greenslander Greenslide in 2022. Yeah. Tell me, have you seen these fault lines emerging in, you know, Queensland's, the Greens' electability in Queensland? You of yourself are a Queenslander. You've been in Parliament for a lot longer than the fellow Queenslanders that joined you in 2022. Did you see this happening from a while off?
Oh, look, we've been slogging it out for several decades now, trying to kind of get our message out that we're here for people and we're here for the planet, and that you can actually have a politics that works for you rather than just works for political donors or vested interests or the 1%. And I think eventually we just got that message out more effectively. We had more people that were helping us door knock. We're having more of those one-on-one conversations. We don't get a huge amount of media coverage because the likes of Rupert Murdoch really hate us. Mm-hmm. And that's okay because the feeling's mutual. Because I think it took that time to actually make those connections with ordinary people. And now we've got 3 awesome people in the lower house representing the federal seats of Brisbane, Ryan and Griffith, which is kind of like inner Brisbane, if you like. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're really taking it up to the current government and trying to make them actually deliver on things like proper transition to clean energy, funding schools, making the doctor free, putting dental into Medicare, the stuff that actually would help people in their daily lives. Turns out it's harder than you might expect.
Yeah, that's something I'm quite curious about, Larissa. As you mentioned there, Rupert Murdoch, a billionaire, not particularly fond of giving attention to a political party that wants to tax billionaires a little bit more. As the jock in the office, the lens that I've kind of looked at what's happened with the Greens, and I feel like it was a little bit to do with Di Natale coming through. When you guys, Di Natale, Ludlam and yourself were coming through, it felt like the messaging from the Greens got a little bit tighter. It was like a sports team coming together and saying, let's be disciplined at what we do. Let's not give away any silly penalties. Let's not kind of get dragged down into little bits and pieces that might flare people up and create a week of headlines, but don't have a huge amount of substance in them necessarily. Seems like you guys have really zoned in and focused on things like housing and dental and mental going into Medicare. What has the shift been like, if there has been one, in the internal kind of back room of the Greens over the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I'm sure Richard would be stoked to get that compliment. He's happily out of politics now, living his best life. But I think we've always had a really broad policy platform. We've always had policies on making sure everyone has a home and, you know, properly funding schools and hospitals. But I guess we used to emphasise our environmental and climate policies perhaps a little more, and we clearly still have those. We're still the Greens. But we're talking about the broader range of policies now. And I think we're kind of, the public are giving us permission to not be one-hit wonders, if you like. They're actually wanting to hear what we stand for on those other non-environment issues now, and they're really liking what they hear. And I think also the fact that the housing crisis is really, really bad and is worse than it's ever been, and you're not seeing genuine solutions proposed by either of the big political parties. They're doing some tinkering, or every time they propose something even slightly brave, they then resile from it really quickly, like you saw with Shorten when he briefly proposed that they actually do something about those dodgy tax perks for property developers, and then, didn't win the election, and then, they took the wrong message from that. Now they're not being brave at all. So I think people really want someone who will understand the pain they're in and wants to do something to fix it and isn't prepared to piss off the property investors or the oligarchs, the Murdochs, the billionaires. And so I think all of those things are contributing to why more people are thinking about voting Green.
Yes, there was inroads made in Queensland that I don't necessarily think Adam Bant was doing himself, because a lot of the Green stuff is grassroots and door knocking. But I do find that there's different messaging in different places, which I guess is politics. But I did find it quite interesting in our interview with Adam Bant, where he didn't really see the similarities between himself and Bob Katter as like a, you know what I mean? As a
I'm relieved to hear that.
as a lone wolf at that time, one Greens MP in the lower house, one KAP MP in the lower house. They had bargaining power. They had, they had a place and they had a role, and they were neither Liberal or Labor.
Katter was the mining minister for the Liberal National Party in Queensland for a good 20 years. So, just to get on the record.
Yeah, I am. I don't know what they did to make him go independent, but I'm sure he'll tell us in his...
He got pretty cranky, I reckon.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say, Larissa, now you've also denied any similarities to Bob Katter, as has Adam Bant, but it is undeniable in that Queensland Greens campaign that someone in the infrastructure of the Queensland Greens knew how to talk to Queenslanders, which is what Bob Katter knows how to do. So what changed?
Well, you're right. I think we each know our people. And look, I don't know Bob Katter very well. He's obviously a very popular local member who keeps getting re-elected and appears to speak his mind. So, I don't really have much of a view of him beyond the fact that when he was Mines Minister in Queensland, he could have introduced the right to say no so that farmers could protect their land from coal, and he did not. However, Queensland is a peculiar lot. We like our own, we have strong views, we have an identity that's quite different to the rest of the country. And so, I think it's right that you need your own people to appeal to your people. Max and Stephen and Libby and myself and Penny, who's our other senator now, who's based in Gladstone. We're from here. We understand what Queenslanders, who we are and what we want and how we communicate. So I think that does always help. They say all politics is local, and maybe that's what they mean.
But what I'm asking is, now with such heavy Queensland representation in the Greens, different issues in Queensland, they campaign differently in Queensland. They have different slogans. They have different people. Max Chandler-Marr, he's short back and sides, straight white male, but he's a very different person to Adam Bant. Is there a push and shove between Melbourne? Because traditionally everyone viewed Greens HQ as Melbourne. I'm sure it still is. The leader is the member for Melbourne. But how do you say, no, this won't play in Queensland?
Well, I reckon traditionally people viewed us as a Tassie party because Bob and Christine came out of Tassie, and you're right, then our kind of centre of numbers shifted to Victoria, and now we do have 5 Queenslanders, so I suppose we are the biggest state represented in party room, but we're all pretty frank with each other. We just say what we think's going to fly or what won't fly, and nobody takes that personally. We all understand that some issues will resonate more deeply in different parts of the country. So we just kind of say that and get on with it.
Now, Jonathan Sri is an interesting character. I've met a couple of times. He's part of the Greens in Brisbane. He was in council for years. He lives in a houseboat in Norman Creek, and he wears a beanie everywhere, and he looks like the type of person that Queenslanders probably wouldn't listen to, but he does understand Queenslanders, and I feel there's a respect there, vice versa, from across the aisle in all types of politics for Jonathan Sri. But I do remember him saying after the election of Scott Morrison, where Bill Shorten was defeated in somewhat of a shock, where Scott Morrison came through, the miracle, how good's Australia election.
Saviour.
Yeah. And he was in many ways, but I want to ask, Jonathan Sri wrote an article about the convoy that went up to Queensland, and I guess I don't know whether it was Greens affiliated, but the Greens were definitely supporting it, and how much Jonathan Sri thought that wasn't the right thing to do in what we all assumed was a climate change election. It felt like rural people were being antagonised by inner city latte sipping lefties, which we all know is some sort of is an exaggerated Australian political trope. But in that circumstance, it did look real. Do you see things that happen as a Queenslander who understands these people? And I'm sure you have to have a whole range of different conversations every time you go to the shops. Do you ever see things like that where when you think maybe that's not the best thing to be doing right now?
Look, I've got really mixed vibes on that one. It wasn't a Greens convoy, although Bob Brown, who is obviously one of our Greens founders and our former leader, was leading the convoy. And it was in protest against the Adani mega coal mine, which is a company that's got a global history of screwing over its workers, trashing whatever project from an environmental perspective that they put their hands on. And now there's allegations of corruption and money laundering, if memory serves me correctly. So not really a great reputable company. And so I think the convoy was using that as a kind of emblematic symbol of the fact that we're in a climate crisis. But I think you are right that Queenslanders don't like to be told what to do by anyone, let alone anyone from southern states. And so I think whilst the intention was good, I can also understand why locals felt that they weren't being heard, they were being told. And now, many of those people in the convoy, I know many of them, they're wonderful folk, they care about the climate. But I think the challenge for us and the challenge for anyone who wants to be a representative of Queensland is to actually listen to people. And so that's why the Greens' view was we actually want to ask those communities what they want. Many of them don't want a dangerous, dirty mining job. Many of them just want to have an option for what sort of job they might have the ability to go into. And we took to that election a policy of saying, look, we need to transition out of coal. It's screwing up the climate. But the workers are not the ones that are to blame for that, and they shouldn't be the ones to suffer. So we took a costed policy that said for 10 years, we will pay coal workers at the same wage they were getting from those mega coal mines, but we will help them find new work, and we will set up a community consultation group in each of those regions about asking that community what kind of economy they want, what is the next big industry or big thing that they want their town to be centred around. So I think that was probably more the approach that I felt was appropriate when you're speaking to people who, currently work in the mines. Often they don't love it either. It's really dirty work. It's dangerous, black lungs back in Queensland, that lung disease that we thought we'd eliminated 100 years ago. And they know they're being replaced by machines because those big companies that hire them, they're only hiring them until they can replace them with a robot. So it's not work that has longevity, and it's not enjoyable or safe work. And we know the rates of harassment on those sites are really bad, not just for women, but for all of the workers. So, yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but I think it was a bit more nuanced.
Thank you for giving us an answer.
Portrayed.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm curious about. You guys have to talk now to coal miners. Obviously, with the stuff between the unions and the Labor Party that flared up last year, it seemed like there were a few people that are going to be coming across to the Greens. What are some of the archetypes or the newer archetypes that you're finding in Greens voters?
Oh, that's such a good question. We do have a cohort of workers who have felt like their big company, not just coal miners but workers generally, who felt like their employers aren't, don't really care about them. And they've, previously they were a bit disappointed that the Labor Party wasn't stronger on workers' rights. Now, that being said, Labor have done some positive things this term of government on workers' rights. I can't say they've done nothing. They have done some good stuff and we've supported them, but they haven't perhaps gone as far as they should. And then, of course, they've had this big argy-bargy with one of the key unions, and they've taken a pretty draconian approach now at a kind of like a pre-crime approach, if you like bad sci-fi movies, are kind of condemning people without a court process. So we thought that was just ridiculous and way too far. And obviously where there's actual crime, fine, that's what we have courts for, to deal with that. But you shouldn't just demonise a whole industry without actually checking whether people have done something wrong. So I guess that's one of the new cohorts. A lot of women support the Greens. I've got the women's portfolio. It's work I love to do. I love talking about gender equality, ending violence against women, equal pay, women's healthcare. Just ran an inquiry into perimenopause and menopause. I don't know how old you guys are or if you've got female partners, but, either your partners or your mums might be across that work that we've done. So I think women have traditionally been strong supporters of the Greens, and, they continue to look to us to stick up for them. And obviously young people who understand the climate crisis and who are really sick of the corporate elites controlling democracy, they're flocking to us in record numbers because, we're not for sale, and we say, hopefully we say it clearly and boldly. We say what matters to them.
Those numbers are clearly growing. Like if you look at what's happened over the past few elections, do you still find the same level of vitriol from certain parts of the community that you might have, say, 10 to 15 to 20 years ago? Like are people still bailing you up, going fucking tree-hugging lefties, et cetera, et cetera? Does that still happen, or is it softened?
Not so much. We still get a few quite antagonistic people, but often those people are supporters of other far-right small parties. So, we're just not their bag. They're not our bag. Like, fine, let's just go about our way and just go have a nice day. But no, I think there's more understanding now of what the Greens actually stand for. There's less stereotypical view of us. Like, we are tree-hugging hippies, but also, we're professionals, we're people with big hearts, we're people that want a much fairer society, we're people that are unashamedly in love with nature. Like, we're more than just the stereotype. We're just ordinary people who have had the crazy idea to, put our hands up to represent the values that other people might share.
So in, let's say, 2006, you ran as a Green candidate at a Queensland election. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, you've done your homework. I ran against the Premier, Peter Beattie.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Peter Beattie, the member for Brisbane, Brisbane Central. Now, it's an interesting one I want to talk to you about. There's always been another political trope is that young people, they're quite idealistic in their youth, and then they grow up. And that, if you're voting Liberal under 40, you don't have a heart. If you're voting Labor over 40, you don't have a brain, is the traditional trope. Now, Peter Beattie's a good example of this. When he was the age you were, or maybe even younger, when he was a young man, he was involved in student politics. This is a premier, one of the longest premiers we had of Queensland in recent memory. He was there for a long while, and it was a pretty solid government. But when he was a young man, he was taking batons from cops out front of the Springboks protest during apartheid. He was working closely with Indigenous activists like Sam Watson. He basically, as a lot of young Labor politicians, Albanese himself lived on the fringe a little bit, and was
radicals.
Used to be radicals. How does that kind of moderation and maturity manifest itself in the Greens? Or have you basically stayed consistent in your views since you were in your 20s running against the Premier of Queensland in a state election?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I've stayed consistent in my views because they're just the values that I hold, and I've been lucky to be raised by parents that are natural Greens voters and, care about equality and nature. So I'm one of the lucky ones who didn't have to have awkward conversations with my family at Christmas time. But I think I'm not sure if that trope is true anymore. I mean, I haven't looked at the studies on, demographics, but there's a lot of young people that support us, yes, but we've still got a lot of support in folk that are, in their parenting kind of years. And then we've got a really big cohort of really progressive older people who have lived back when uni was free, back when you could afford to buy a house, back when the ozone layer was the biggest environmental problem we had. And they now see how tough it is for this generation to know what the hell their life's going to hold, to be able to afford to live, whether it's buying a house or even renting anywhere. And they can see the increased control of corporate elites on our democracy. And so, I think in those middle years, you're just really busy. And if you've got kids like I do and you're working full time, life's just you just got to get through the day. But so I don't know if I agree that people get more conservative as they age.
Well, I don't think it is as prevalent anymore because young people, as you've just outlined, don't have as much to conserve. There's no assets really. Yeah. They don't get the quarter-acre block that, generations before had that they wanted to protect. They're still kind of on a hamster wheel of, hoping to realise even a remotely similar adulthood that their parents were able to achieve in their 20s. So that's not necessarily the case, but I'm sure you have seen examples of kids coming in a bit gung-ho into the Greens. And it's important for parties to welcome young people and listen to what they have to say. But how do you navigate that when you've got someone who walks into your party and says, I don't think banks should exist and we should get rid of cops?
Yeah. Well, we do think banks should exist, but we like the idea of public banks. And we do think that
she's a good Queenslander. Nationalise the banks. Nationalise the banks.
Yeah, nationalise the banks. And, we have a kind of nuanced view on policing. Police have, unfortunately, a pretty sad history in Queensland of, abusing First Nations people, LGBTIQ plus community. I'm sure there's some great police in the force, but we need proper training for them, and we need to address the cultural issues that is plagued, that plagues that organisation. And we don't think that criminal responses are the first port of call. So I guess to respond to your question, I mean, not always, sometimes they are, but certainly not for things like, drug use, which is a health issue. So I guess we're just not that far apart from those young radicals. We actually have those same values and we might sort of express it differently, but in the Greens, we've got policies that our members write that you've got to agree to if you want to become a member. I mean, you don't have to agree to every single one, but, you wouldn't bother joining a political party if you didn't agree with most of what they stand for. And so we all have input into that. We all have to feel comfortable with it. And if those values change, then you don't have to be a member of the Greens. You can go do something else. So there's not really that much difference. We love the energy of the young people that are flooding our membership, though, and I think probably that's why we're doing more door knocking than ever before, and that's been really good for us. It helps us get our message out, but importantly, it helps us learn what ordinary people care about and what they want done in politics.
Now, one thing we've learnt over the last couple of years, particularly since the Voice referendum and the events of October 7th, which almost directly followed that, is how important language is and how important it is to not be clunky with your language. Is that something that you've had to keep an eye on within your party as a party that has, many would say, a contrarian position to the rest of Parliament in regards to what's happening in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, we do get tone policed all of the time. And you do have to be sensitive in how you communicate, particularly when they're issues that are really deeply held issues to so many people. It's respectful to be careful with your wording, but you also got to speak truth to power. And, it's not just us calling it a genocide in Gaza. Like the actual ICJ and other international bodies have recognised that. So the fact that the other parties don't have the guts to call something what it is doesn't give them the right to tone police us.
I mean, I'm talking about self-policing.
Yeah, I suppose I do self-police a bit because I would swear all the time if I didn't, and that's not always appropriate.
Yeah.
I have to watch that when I'm in the Senate chamber. Look, I try to be a compassionate, respectful person generally. And so if I'm having a conversation with someone, I try not to judge people. I know that sounds perhaps a bit silly or frivolous, I don't know, but look, the world's got enough hatred and posturing in it. So I guess the way I tone police is to just try to let people be who they are and to try to find commonality when I'm having a chat with someone. And there will always be something that I can find that I share with someone, even if it's not, political views about the big issues of the day. But I just think you've got to try and make peace at every opportunity because the world's pretty stuffed right now and we don't need more hatred or division. We need to just remember that we're all human beings in this shit show together.
Now, this young immigrant next to me has a question to ask.
I do. I got a couple, but the one I do want to ask about tone policing. We don't have to worry too much about swearing here on the Betoota Advocate podcast. We did have a little laugh a few years ago initially about the whole dual citizenship scandal and the fallout from all of that, which I believe begun with Scott Ludlam, etc. In terms of the biggest fucking waste of time and money that our parliament has ever seen, how would you rank that one?
There are so many contenders for that title. Yeah, look, I think, obviously I felt like a prize idiot and I was mortified that I made my party look stupid because that's the one thing that I've always wanted to not do. So it's actually still a bit, I still get a bit emotional about that whole situation. But fundamentally, we've got some really archaic rules that actually lock out half the population from being able to be elected to federal parliament if that's what they want to try to do, because half of us were either born overseas or our parents were. And Section 44 says that means you are ineligible to be in parliament. So, in my case, I didn't realise because, my folks are Australian. I was only there until I was 11 months old, and I thought I had to opt in to dual citizenship, not opt out, as it turns out. But fundamentally, it doesn't change the fact that it's basically a really racist provision. And it is ensuring that our parliament doesn't look like our community. And it's no wonder we get really stupid decisions out of our parliament a lot of the time. And if we did have representation that was more diverse, we might start to get better quality of decision making. And we have made some inroads, in the last election in particular. We're majority women in the Senate now, and you can feel that. It really feels different and so much better than it did under, say, the Morrison prime ministership or even the Abbott prime ministership. So the culture of the place isn't static. It can change. We've got people with disability. We've got more people of colour now. It's starting to feel a bit less elite, but it still is very elite. It's still very 1%. And I think fixing Section 44 really could help with that in future. But then, we've got so many big issues that need changing in our constitution. It feels a bit self-interested to say, we should fix that one little clause that tripped me up. We should have recognition for First Nations people. Like, obviously, the voice referendum was a total stuff-up and should have passed. But, we should have truth and treaty as well as voice. So there's a lot of kind of get-in-line issues when it comes to constitutional reform, and often those referendum fail. So, yeah, it was written by a bunch of white men, in a room 120 odd years ago, and now it kind of dictates the fact that we can't have diversity in our parliament.
And the people of New England, they'll never forgive Parliament for the racist treatment of Barnaby Joyce.
Oh, yeah, good old Bananaby.
There's still 50% lawyers in there as well, which I believe you are one as well, Larissa.
Well, in my defence, I'm a community environmental lawyer. I worked in a not-for-profit community legal centre for 10 years trying to help people, help nature. But yes, I do have a law degree.
Yeah. But yes, it was. It was a great waste of time. We booted everyone out. Then we spent a bunch of money bringing pretty much all of them back in. And the Perth barrister who kicked it all off got to feel good about himself, bringing Parliament to its knees for a period of time. Was there a few chuckles and a bit of relief when the likes of Canavan and co started going down in the middle of that as well?
Look, again, I didn't want to. I'd gone through the ringer and I didn't wish that on anyone, even the likes of Canavan, who's not my favourite person, but it was a pretty horrible experience to go through. But I did kind of show, don't blow your mouth off or you might trip yourself up.
Yeah. Who are some of your favourite people across the aisle?
I get along with quite a lot of the Labor women. We do a lot of work on Senate committees. The Senate's pretty different to the House. They always seem to be attacking each other down there, and it feels genuinely toxic. And in the Senate, generally, we have a more constructive approach, and we are kind of less shouty on the whole. And so the committee work that you get to do is really interesting, and they're always multi-partisan committees. So there's generally a Labor, Liberal, Green or independent, and sometimes some of those other smaller parties have a go too. And so you do kind of get to know them, and I can get along well with most people. You just don't talk about certain issues if you know that you're really going to get
Kick
upset,
off.
or crossed by them. So yeah, I've got a few that I get on well with.
I want to go back to talking about elites because it's the type of language that does play well in Queensland. Ever since those bastards in Canberra drew the Brisbane line across the northern half of Australia during World War II, and it became clear later on that their military strategy was to sacrifice Queensland to the Japanese and prioritise Melbourne and Sydney. Maybe that was the start of it. Maybe it's always been the case that Queenslanders don't like, as you said before, being told what to do by those bastards down south. Elite is an interesting word. It can be used against a whole lot of people for a whole lot of different reasons. During the Voice campaign, everyone was an elite. Everyone except the elites.
Especially anyone who wanted compassion or fairness.
Yeah. Aboriginal people became elites. I mean, it comes into every argument. We're seeing a lot of it in America now. Who are the elites? Are they people who are actors? Are they people who are, people who go to art galleries in their spare time? Are they people that, or indeed the types I think you're talking about are the billionaires who don't pay tax? How has the Greens, and I'm gonna ask you to answer this question directly because everyone can see what's happened. In the last 5-10 years, the Greens have had a much more targeted approach to the Australian working class, be that through housing, be that through wages, be that through free mental and free dental. These aren't really things that we as Australian voters felt like the Greens were talking about in the initial Tassie kind of tree-hugging, dope-smoking era. Not to stereotype, but, that was what people thought of the Greens. Now they see Max Chandler-Meyer on stage with the CFMEU. Now they're hearing about rent freezes, and now they've got 3 seats in South Brisbane. When was that decision made to ramp up that side of policy, and who was it driven by?
I don't know if there's any one person, and I will answer you to the best of my ability. I think it was a gradual shift. You're right that in the early days we definitely focused a lot more on nature, and I want to reassure you that we still do love nature, but we just also talk about other stuff a bit more now too. That doesn't diminish our concern for the natural world or for climate policy. But I think we realised that as the cost of living crisis got worse, as the housing crisis really made itself felt, even as COVID hit, that, most ordinary people didn't really have the luxury of being able to care about nature as their top order issue of the day. It didn't mean that they didn't care. They just had other more pressing concerns. And, they were literally just trying to decide between buying school textbooks or getting fresh veggies that week. And I think we just acknowledge that if you want to be able to deliver climate action and fairness, you've got to meet people where they're at. You've got to talk about stuff and listen to people and explain that, look, we understand your predicament and we actually have thought about that, and here's what we reckon could make your life better. So I think it was gradual. And yeah, I think all of those kind of just cost of living crisis, housing crisis, COVID, just kind of made that clearer to us that we needed to focus more on those bread and butter issues that, like I said before, had always been in our policy platform. We haven't changed our policy, but we have started to talk about them more. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's it explains it. It's, I mean, electability is also part of your job as well, identifying that, and it is. It does feel like this next election won't be a climate election. And even in this conversation now, you're not necessarily saying climate, you're saying nature. I'm not trying to gaslight or whatever, but that was one thing that was very noticeable in the Queensland 2022 campaign. There was a lack of using words that traditionally make people shut off, because whether it creates like a nihilistic feeling within, or climate change is quite an alarming word to read and to think about. Nature, environmentalism are a bit softer. Were these calculated decisions?
No, that's just me picking whatever word falls into my head at the time. I'm sorry. I wish it was more than that. We've also got, climate isn't nature. Climate is obviously everything, but biodiversity, we're also in a biodiversity crisis. So I guess when I say nature, I'm meaning biodiversity and climate. But no, there's no sort of science behind it. No one's told me to use that word and not other words.
Because it's working.
But yeah, you're right. We need to let people know, reassure them that we are a safe bet for their vote, and that we'll stand up not just for the planet but also for them.
The bells are ringing there before. It's a bit of madness. Sorry, no.
They're about to start again too.
About to start again. There's a bit of madness down there in Canberra. Things are wrapping up. Everyone's a bit on edge when an election's going to be called. Is it going to be at 3:07 p.m. After Tuesday and this interest rate announcement? Do you guys have any sense of when it'll be, or are you planning for any particular date?
Look, all of the pundits seem to be settling on April 12, because obviously the WA election is March 8, and, there'd have to be a bit of overlap if the federal election was called before March 8. I mean, they can have concurrent elections, but prevailing wisdom seems to be they'd rather not. So, yeah, probably the Sunday or Monday after the WA election for April 12, or, I mean, the current government are not polling very well, and they're not really tearing strips off Mr. Dutton yet, even though they should be. And he's, in my view, weird and creepy, and would be not should be kept out of the Prime Minister's office at all costs. So maybe they'll decide that they need a bit more time to try to convince people that they have a plan and want to do something, rather than just be a bit of a small target, which feels to me like they have been for the last little while. So I don't know. I'm not a betting person, so I haven't put any bets on what date. But yeah,
story about that today. Are you aware of people betting on political outcomes down in Canberra?
I think you can bet on the date, can't you? I didn't know that.
You can bet on the date. You can bet on all sorts of stuff. You can bet on seats. Well, there was a story that a lot of staffers are apparently betting on the results of the election and different seats and bits and pieces, and how that fits in with gambling regulation as well. Is that something you've seen around or heard?
I haven't heard that, but I can believe it. I mean, we don't think that there shouldn't be any gambling as such, but the gambling advertising is the issue that we have, and the fact that it's kind of seeped into absolutely everything now, like politics as well, as you've just highlighted. And, he's getting into kids through their feeds and through sports programs. That's what we have problems with. I don't want to tell anyone what to do with their own money in their own time, but a lot of those pokies in particular are designed to addict people, and designed to fire your adrenaline and your cortisol off to, make you waste more money. So it's a pretty dangerous industry, and they make very generous political donations to both sides of politics, as I'm sure you know. So I've never bet on an election. I won't. And, it's up to others what they do, but it's not a good way for democracy.
Senator Waters, I've felt like I've grilled you a little bit today about who the Greens are and who they were and who they are aspiring to be. And I appreciate you giving frank answers. It's very refreshing.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I appreciate you being so well prepared. You've done so much homework. I feel privileged. Thank you.
Well, you're a institution of Queensland politics now. You've been elected and sacked once and elected twice, and you remain.
Technically resigned, but yes.
Yeah, resigned. And you're going to keep coming back. What I want to ask is, what are your other predictions for gains? And this is not because I'm going to be placing bets, but I remember Adam Bance said in the lead up to the 2022 election, he said, we've got a couple in Queensland we reckon will get away.
Yeah.
And at that time, it made me pay a lot more attention to their campaigns in Brisbane. And at the time he said it, I think I was a bit dismissive, but then, we saw the green slide.
Yes.
What
we
do
all drink
you
the
think?
Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Confession, we do all drink the Kool-Aid, but we've got a marvellous candidate in Moreton, Rima Naji, who's a Palestinian activist and just a fantastic woman, really great speaker, really great community person. So I reckon we're in with a shot in Moreton because the
Where's Moreton? Is that in the Bayside or is that in Maruka?
Maruka. It's kind of
Maruka.
next to Griffith, so Maruka, Annalee kind of way if you know Brisbane
community.
Yeah, so I reckon we're in with a shot in Moreton, particularly because their current member is retiring. And, hopefully they can go have a lovely post-politics life. And Richmond, I would love for us to win Richmond because we have the most spectacular candidate, Mandy Nolan, who's a comedian, who is just this fierce, hilarious woman who is kind of, the people have called her the Greens Jackie Lambie.
Okay.
They mean that in a kind way. And, yeah, she's awesome. So I'd love for us to get Richmond. And probably Wills, I think, in Victoria, Melbourne way is another strong chance for us. So Sam Ratnam, who was our Green state leader there, has decided to go for Wills, and she's really well loved and another woman of colour, and yeah, she'd be great. So yeah, we've got a few irons in the fire.
What about,
of course, we want to keep all of our current people.
Mid-North, North Coast, New South Wales? I mean, it's surely Byron's ready for the right.
Yeah, well, Richmond covers Byron, so that's
right.
Mandy's hopeful seat.
Yeah,
and she ran last time and got close.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we just want to get her over the line this time around. We've had the mayoralty in Byron Shire for quite some time, so we've had a strong Green presence in that region. But yeah, federally we've never cracked it yet. But hopefully this one's the one.
And just before you go, I'm interested to know where the parcels are of surprise. Well, not it wouldn't surprise you, but would surprise us as to where you find, clusters of support. I always hear about North Queensland, the very tip, Leichhardt.
Yeah. Good, strong support in North Queensland. Maybe like slightly surprising to other people would be farming areas where we've campaigned really strongly against coal seam gas, like just wrecking farmland and, contaminating and depleting the groundwater table. But also like the outer suburban areas of Brisbane where people are really finding the cost of living's biting hard. We got really strong support from that area in the state election and in council before that. So, yeah, it's our support for us is growing everywhere. And that's
and the
me.
bells
I've
ring.
got
The
to
bells
go and
ring. You
vote
got to
on
go.
something again.
Thanks,
It's
Larissa.
been really lovely to meet you both.
Yeah,
Keep
thank
up
you.
the great work. I love that you bring politics to ordinary people's lives in a way that they find engaging. So thank you and keep it
Thanks,
up.
Larissa.
We might have to have a chat during the campaign.
Talk soon.
Oh, sounds great.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.